The mountains I'm about to show you are some of Earth's most dangerous and mysterious mountains. People have died, vanished without a trace, and those who survived experienced things no one can explain. This video isn't just for entertainment. This video could literally save your life. Here are 3 mountains you should never go near, starting with one that has a chilling reputation for never letting visitors return.
To date, close to 7,000 different people have scaled Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. But there is one mountain thousands of meters shorter and not even in the top 100 highest peaks in the world that no one dares to climb. Not even the most experienced mountaineers. That mountain is Mount Kailash. In the late 20th century, a group of Siberian mountaineers attempted to summit this mountain. This was just a few decades after another group of mountaineers had attempted the same feat, but ended up vanishing without a trace. Hours into the climbing, each of the climbers made a shocking discovery. They had started to age, very rapidly. Their hair and fingernails had grown out significantly, making them look like they'd been living on the mountain for a few weeks, rather than just climbing for a few hours. Not even anywhere close to the peak of the mountain, the climbers decided to abandon the expedition and go back to their normal lives. Unknown to them, normal went out the door the day they decided to climb Mount Kailash. Barely 1 year after their climbing attempt, every single one of the climbers who went on that expedition died. And while that is mysterious enough on its own, the conditions under which all of the climbers died turn out to be even more strange. The climbers, who were all young men at the time of the climb, died of old age, which suggests that the mountain had caused them to age by decades in just 1 year. Experts who have been looking into this mountain say that this may not even be a mountain at all, citing its near-perfect sides. They say it might actually be a man-made pyramid built by an ancient but technologically advanced civilization. Some would conclude this race to be divine. Others would insist that they are extraterrestrial. For several days, I scoured the internet, reading, watching, and listening intently to literally everything I could find about Mount Kailash. The result of my findings? A lot more questions than answers. This is probably the most mysterious geological phenomenon to ever exist. Chapter 1. The Mystery of Mount Kailash. Mount Kailash, also known as Kailash Parbat, or the Stairway to Heaven, is located in the southwest corner of Tibet. For many centuries now, this mountain has captivated the collective imagination of the entire human race for many mysterious reasons. And the fact that the mountain sits on the border between China and India isn't even one of them. The mountain also seems to have a thing with the number 4. For context, 4 religions lay claim to Mount Kailash as a holy site: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and the Bon religion. But more on this later. Secondly, 4 rivers flow out of Kailash, and each of these rivers flows in the direction of each of the 4 cardinal points. First is the Indus River, which flows north. Then we have the Sutlej, which flows west. Third is the Brahmaputra, which flows east. And then we have the Karnali River, which flows south. But even that isn't where things start to get strange. Let's talk about the appearance of this so-called mountain. Judging by looks alone, Mount Kailash hardly looks like a mountain. Now, to be clear, Mount Kailash isn't the only mountain that takes the shape of a pyramid. There are many other pyramidal peaks in the world, like Pyramid Mountain in Alberta, Alpamayo in Peru, Muratov Peak in Bulgaria, and several others. However, as you can see, all of these other mountains have the imperfections you'd expect from a naturally occurring landform. Mount Kailash, on the other hand, does not. Its sides are almost perfectly perpendicular, almost like someone intentionally designed and constructed the mountain that way. This gives Kailash a highly symmetrical look, with each slope aligning to each of the 4 cardinal points. And this brings me to my next point. Each of the 4 faces of Mount Kailash is reported to have different colors. The north face is said to be the color of gold. The south face is lapis lazuli. The east face is the color of crystal. And the west face is the color of ruby. Speaking of faces, the northern slopes of Mount Kailash always have far less snow than its southern slopes. Now, that doesn't immediately strike you as odd until you realize that in the northern hemisphere of the Earth, the south side typically gets more sunlight than the north side. This means that, naturally speaking, the north face of Mount Kailash should have far more snow than the south side, since it receives less sunlight. But once again, Mount Kailash bends the law of nature, and its northern slope experiences relatively little snow in comparison to the south face that gets more sunlight and still manages to welcome glaciers and snowfall all year round. As if this isn't weird enough, there's also the very strange magnetic force field on Mount Kailash. On a good day, finding your bearing with a compass is a pretty simple task, since the Earth's magnetic field is as straightforward as a bar magnet with a north pole and a south pole. On Mount Kailash, however, that law seems to break entirely. People who have tried using a compass at Mount Kailash have found that it never works. The needles just keep spinning and never end up pointing north. Mount Kailash also has 0 plant life, which is highly unusual. Mountains always have trees and plants growing out from their fissures. But strangely, on Mount Kailash, not even 1 plant can be found. It's completely barren. Now, here's where things go from weird to, quote, too coincidental to be random, unquote. The south face of Mount Kailash seems to come with a swastika inscribed on it. No one knows if this was inscribed by someone or if it was the result of natural activity. All we know for sure is that when the sun sets on the south side of Mount Kailash, the massive vertical ice cracks and horizontal strata of the rock form a shadow of a left-facing swastika, which, interestingly, is considered an auspicious sign for all 4 religions that consider Mount Kailash sacred. Amazed? Well, things get even weirder, because the swastika isn't the only ancient religious symbol inscribed on Mount Kailash. According to satellite views of the mountain, the face of Hindu deity, Lord Shiva, appears on Mount Kailash. Also, the snow on the peak of this mountain takes the shape of Om, which is considered the greatest and most sacred syllable of all the mantras in Hinduism. Things are definitely no less mysterious on the geographical side of things. Mount Kailash is popularly known within geographical circles as the navel of the Earth. This is because the mountain sits exactly at the very center of the planet, or the axis mundi, as some religions call it. From this position, Mount Kailash maintains an eerily consistent distance from major structures around the world. For instance, Kailash is 6,666 kilometers away from Stonehenge, as well as the North Pole and the South Pole. Not weird enough for you? Well, Mount Kailash is also 13,332 kilometers from base to peak. That's 6,666 kilometers times 2. On top of that, Mount Kailash has these 2 lakes which bend the laws of science just as well as Kailash itself does. The 2 lakes are known as Mansarovar and Rakshastal, and from their characteristics today, you'd hardly believe that these 2 used to be the same body of water before they became separated due to tectonic activity. On the one hand is Mansarovar. It's a freshwater lake, round like the sun and boasting aquatic life. But here's where things get interesting. Mansarovar is the highest freshwater lake in the world. However, even at its altitude, the lake never freezes over, no matter the time of the year. The lake also never moves, regardless of what extreme weather condition hits the area. Rakshastal, on the other hand, is completely different. Also called the Demon Lake, Rakshastal is shaped like the crescent moon, extremely salty, does not support life, and is quite turbulent compared to the Mansarovar. On top of that, locals claim that the Rakshas Tal periodically vanishes, leaving behind parched ground, only to mysteriously reappear at full volume later, like it never left in the first place. This is why some people refer to the lake as the Ghost Lake. However, none of these features of Mount Kailash are as bewildering or as terrifying as the experiences people have had trying to climb this mountain. Besides the horror story of the Siberian climbers, who died of old age after climbing Mount Kailash, there are other less terrifying but still unexplainable encounters that climbers have recorded on this mountain. In fact, except you're a hardened cynic, you'd probably be, at least, open to the idea that there's something or someone on this mountain who does not want anyone climbing it. Climbers have reported finding themselves suddenly going back the same way they came while trying to get to the peak of the mountain, almost like the mountain changed position as they climbed. Others were forced down by sudden, unexplained blizzards or rainstorms from nowhere, while some simply felt a mysterious wave of illness that made it impossible for them to continue. Colonel Wilson, one of the many mountaineers who tried to scale the summit of Mount Kailash, said, "Just when I discovered an easy walk to the summit of the mountain, heavy snow began to fall, making the ascent impossible." Sergei Chistyakov's experience was even far worse. In the words of the Russian climber, "When we approached the foot of the mountain, my heart was pounding. I was in front of the sacred mountain, which has never been beaten. I felt extremely emaciated, and suddenly I was captivated by the thought that I do not belong on this mountain, that I must necessarily come back. As soon as we started the descent, I felt liberated." But it's not just humans who have been unable to conquer Mount Kailash. Even our technological advancements in aeronautics have been beaten by this mountain. To date, even our most sophisticated planes still can't fly over Mount Kailash, as there seems to be some invisible force that keeps them from proceeding beyond a specific elevation at that height. What could possibly explain the multiple riddles thrown to us by Mount Kailash? Well, currently there are two theories, and though both of them provide thought-provoking and even plausible answers, neither offers a sufficient explanation to the many mysteries of Kailash on its own. Chapter 2. The Extraterrestrial Theory. The first theory we're going to examine is what I call the extraterrestrial theory, or the ET theory. In other words, there are those who believe that Mount Kailash was built by aliens, or probably even is an alien spacecraft. Here's why they believe that. To begin with, when compared to many Western religions, Hindu deities seem to have a much more tangible material presence on Earth. According to Hindu lore, the gods used to live on Earth thousands of years ago, before humans started to exist. But here's where things get interesting. Rather than make use of their divine powers, Hindu mythology suggests that these gods made use of highly advanced technologies. For instance, the Hindu epic text, Mahabharata, is loaded with examples of these advanced technologies, from flying vehicles to voice-activated weapons, and even events that sound a lot like nuclear detonations. And that's not even all. The Mahabharata also talks about a day in our planet's history when the Earth was surrounded by gigantic cities, and then small vehicles came down from these cities, which apparently had teachers in them. Could these events that the Mahabharata records be talking about encounters, not with the divine, but with aliens? And just in case you're having some doubts, perhaps this might convince you a bit. Hinduism isn't the only religion with such ET-like encounters in their mythology. The Pyautes also speak of an advanced race of beings they call the Hav-Musuvs. These beings were beautiful with golden skin, long dark hair, white clothes, and white sandals. According to the Pyautes, the Hav-Musuvs also rode the wind with flying ships and possessed highly sophisticated weapons like a silver tube that could kill a man with one shot, or what we might call phasers. Altogether, these are three different mythologies from different parts of the world, all alluding to encounters that seem like they could have been with extraterrestrial beings. Even if you're a skeptic, you've got to admit that any other attempt to explain away these legends, other than to simply say that these people definitely experienced something otherworldly, would be a little far-fetched. Besides, we've got even more evidence to support the theory that Mount Kailash could have extraterrestrial origins. And to find this piece of evidence, we'll be taking a trip down to the Ellora Caves in India, where a 3-story temple to Shiva stands. This is the Kailasa Temple, the largest monolithic temple built to be a symbol of Mount Kailash, where Lord Shiva is said to live. According to archaeologists, this temple took 18 years to construct. But here's the twist. Altogether, the people who constructed this temple had to chisel away 400,000 tons of rock to carve out the temple. This means that they would have had to chisel away 60 tons of rock every single day for 18 years. Needless to say, that's an amazing feat of engineering that is impossible today, even with our super advanced technology. And we haven't even taken into account all the intricate embellishments on the walls of the temple. The mystery doesn't end there. Inside this temple is a network of caves and labyrinths, which allegedly lead to a super cave. According to reports, this super cave contains high-tech energy machines and other advanced technologies from an ancient civilization. Could this ancient civilization be referring to extraterrestrials? And is it too far-fetched to think that the same unknown beings who accomplished this feat of engineering in the Kailasa temple could be the same beings who built Mount Kailash with its near-perfect symmetry? Besides, ancient Sanskrit texts speak of power devices with the ability to turn rock into air. Could this device have been used in the construction of the Kailasa temple and Mount Kailash? While you ponder the possibility of that, let's go on to the second theory, or what I call the supernatural theory. Chapter 3. The supernatural theory. With Kailash having so many unexplainable and science-defying features, it should be no surprise that the mountain holds such strong spiritual significance for a number of religions. What is surprising is when scientists start to admit that their findings leave no room for any conclusion other than the fact that Mount Kailash very likely has a supernatural origin. All 4 religions that consider Mount Kailash sacred believe that a supernatural being resides in this mountain. And try as you may to disprove this, the truth remains that a lot of things about Kailash are difficult to explain any other way. The face of Lord Shiva, for instance, the OM sound imprinted on the mountain and even heard around it, the yin-yang lakes at the foot of the mountain and their weird characteristics, the strange lights that are sometimes seen dancing above Lake Mansarovar, the swastika shadow, and this really weird experience a group of scientists had that brought them to the conclusion that Mount Kailash was no ordinary mountain at all. In 1999, award-winning and well-published scientist Dr. Ernst Muldashev traveled to Tibet to explore Mount Kailash with a team of scientists. According to Muldashev, during his expedition, he and his team heard some strange sounds coming from inside the mountain, suggesting that something or someone was living inside Kailash. Writing in an academic paper, Muldashev says, "In the silence of the night, there often were strange, grasping sounds in the belly of the mountain. One night, both my colleagues and I distinctly heard the noise of a falling stone that undoubtedly came from the interior." Muldashev was absolutely convinced that Mount Kailash was an ancient pyramid built by humans, but not ordinary humans. Muldashev seemed to believe that whoever this race of superhumans were, they were not only technologically advanced, but they also understood what he referred to as subtle energy, which, in his mind, probably explained the mystical connection between Mount Kailash and other ancient monumental constructions like the pyramids of Giza and Teotihuacan. Summarizing his thoughts on Mount Kailash, Muldashev wrote, "It is hard for me to discuss this topic from a scientific point of view, but I can quite positively say that the Kailash complex is directly related to life on Earth, and when we did a schematic map of the City of Gods, consisting of pyramids and stone mirrors, we were very surprised. The scheme was similar to the spatial structure of DNA molecules."
Группа Эрнста Мулдашева тщательно исследовала все эти объекты. По итогам была составлена карта города богов. Когда ученый показал ее своим коллегам, генетикам и биологам, те не поверили своим глазам.
Это же огромная каменная ДНК. Так это же матрица жизни на Земле. Почему пирамиды? Вот если вы спросите любого молекулярного биолога, то он скажет, что триплет ДНК, триплет – это как бы основная часть ДНК. Триплет ДНК пирамидален.
What Muldashev is referring to here is the Tibetan legend, which suggests that a city called Shambhala, or the City of Gods, exists underneath Kailash. According to legend, this city contains a sort of reservoir of the human gene pool that preserves the genes of people from ancient civilizations. Interestingly, one man believed that the origins of his race could be traced to this place. You might know him, Adolf Hitler. Verifiable reports show that in 1938, Hitler sent out a team of 5 Germans to explore Tibet for traces of the origin of the Aryan race, which he believed to be superior to all other races on Earth. But some other reports add that
Он хотел создать нового человека. Человека, который бы владел заклинаниями. Великими заклинаниями прошлого. Теми заклинаниями, когда, прошептав что-либо, можно было оторвать скалу и перенести ее взглядом куда-либо. Когда можно было бы строить такие дворцы, как Баальбек, невероятные дворцы, которые невозможно построить с помощью современной техники. Чтобы можно было сделать такие мегалиты, как Бальбекские, например, или Асуанские в Египте, чтобы можно было строить пирамиды, то есть он хотел возвратиться к эре заклинаний, которая была значительно мощнее, чем нынешний мир.
whatever the case, the point is that there are strong reasons to believe that Mount Kailash has a supernatural origin. Or how else do you explain the near-perfect appearance of the mountain, the tragic experience of the unfortunate Siberian climbers, the fact that even our most sophisticated planes can't fly above this mountain, or the weird time travel phenomenon that happens on Mount Kailash? The mythical legends just have to be true. Mount Kailash is a sacred mountain built and inhabited by divine beings, and only those without sin can successfully scale the mount. What other reasonable explanation could there be? Chapter 3. Critical responses to the theories. Well, as it turns out, there are pretty good explanations for some of the mysteries of Mount Kailash. Let's begin with the appearance of the mountain. Yes, Mount Kailash looks almost too perfect to be natural, but some scientists have said that the mountain's pyramidal shape very likely evolved during the ice ages of the Quaternary period about 2.6 million years ago. According to the theory, it was likely during this time that the glaciers dug out valleys and cut back slopes to form the smooth-sided and sharp-edged peak we now know as Mount Kailash. And since we're on the topic of snow and glaciers, one of the mysteries of Mount Kailash that we looked at today was how the mountain's north face has far less snow than the south face. Which is weird, because the south sees far more sunlight than the north and should be the one to have less snow. Well, turns out, there's one thing that's usually left out of the picture when this is brought up, and that is the fact that the southern slope of Mount Kailash faces the Indian Ocean. This means that it gets a lot more precipitation from the summer monsoon than the northern slope. With this moist air constantly rising above the southern slope, it shouldn't be surprising that it gets more snow than its northern sibling, where the air is relatively dry. As for planes not being able to fly over Kailash, this has less to do with supernatural forces keeping planes from flying, and more to do with the geographical terrain of Tibet. A popular nickname for the Tibetan region is the roof of the world, because it's over 4,000 meters above sea level and is dotted by the world's highest mountains. Now, technically, planes can fly over Tibet without accident. However, they avoid this because in the event of an emergency, Tibetan airspace is the worst place you want to be. First off, the cabins of airplanes are pressurized. So, if the plane develops a pressure problem mid-flight, oxygen masks have to be released to allow passengers to breathe. However, these masks typically only contain about 15-20 minutes of air. So, the pilot would have to lower the aircraft to an altitude of 3,000 meters or less, so that passengers don't die of suffocation. This is what makes flying over Tibet a nightmare. There's just no place to descend safely in case of an emergency and crash landing. The plane is an option that only works in movies. And even in movies, it doesn't always work. Unfortunately, these are the only puzzles of Mount Kailash that science can definitively explain. Chapter 4. More questions than answers. All other mysteries of this mountain have remained largely unsolved, including the one everyone is dying to understand, which is the mysterious aging phenomenon that happens on Kailash. One scientific formula came close to unraveling this mystery, as we will soon see. But ultimately, even that hit a dead end, just like the mystery of Om. Karag Singh Valdia, a highly respected geologist and former vice-chancellor of the Kumaun University, says that the depiction of OM on Mount Kailash could be rocks folded twice in a manner that the depressions within the arms of the overturned folds are filled round the year with ice and snow. But the impression of OM on Mount Kailash is too perfect to fit into this explanation. Even the dot is rightly placed. Science also fails to account for the unique geology of Mount Kailash. While surrounding peaks in Tibet are made of sedimentary rock, Kailash is the only mountain in the region to be made from black rock, a raw material that is quite rare. And that's not all. Climbers report finding themselves going the opposite way when trying to summit the mountain, like the mountain was changing its position. And while it's true that mountains are, in fact, always moving, once again, the case of Mount Kailash stands out sharply. For context, researchers who studied Mount Matterhorn, one of the most famous mountains in the world, discovered that it was constantly swaying, once every 2 seconds by their count. But this movement is completely imperceptible to humans, and the only way to measure it is to make use of seismometers. How come Kailash is able to change its position, or at least make it appear so? Another mystery of Mount Kailash that defies scientific explanation is the mystery of its two lakes, Manasarovar and Rakshastal. Why are two lakes in the same geographical location so completely different? Science can't explain. The only thing it can tell us about is Rakshastal's ghost lake status. Apparently, Rakshastal is an endorheic lake, which means that it has no place to flow into. So, to lose water, Rakshastal either has to evaporate into the atmosphere or seep into the ground. This explains how the lake disappears and reappears out of the blue. Manasarovar, on the other hand, is not endorheic, so it loses water by simply flowing into Rakshastal. Still, the two lakes display completely opposing behaviors. As for the weird time travel thing, scientists say that this can be explained using Einstein's theory of relativity. To explain it very simply, this theory says that the closer you are to the Earth, the slower time travels, which would suggest that there is no such thing as absolute time. But that's a whole other rabbit hole that we can't get into right now. Anyway, scientists have run their experiments, and they've found that if you put two atomic clocks on different altitudes, the clock that's higher up will experience faster time travel than the one that's lower down. This idea is referred to as time dilation. But as neat as this sounds, it still doesn't explain how people experience weeks' worth of hair and fingernail growth. Sure, there is a difference in the passage of time on a mountain and at sea level, but the time difference is so small and negligible that you need an extremely sensitive atomic clock to measure it. How then could people have died of old age barely 1 year after visiting Mount Kailash. Perhaps the story is just another incredible urban legend. Or maybe there is some truth to the theories. Whatever the case, if you're thinking of solving the Kailash mystery, I hate to break it to you, but that's a negative. The Chinese government banned the climbing of Mount Kailash in 1980. So, whatever's really going on at Mount Kailash, I guess we'll never know.
The next mountain is more than just strange. It's said to be the nesting ground of one of the world's most elusive and feared creatures. Just like Mount Kailash, it remains off-limits to outsiders, but those who've dared to climb it came back shaken, if they came back at all. Scattered across the snow were massive footprints that no human could make. Hair samples that were analyzed pointed to a species that science couldn't explain. If you're a skeptic, trust me, this next mountain will make you a believer. At a height of 25,000 feet, Genkar Puensum is the world's highest unclimbed mountain. The Bhutanese people have always believed that this sacred peak houses spiritual beings and mythical creatures, leading the Bhutanese government to close the mountain to climbers in 1994. People have long attributed supernatural activity to spectacular geological formations. That in itself isn't new. What's different about Genkar Puensum, however, is that it appears we now have undeniable scientific evidence for some of the mythical claims associated with this peak. In October 2014, mountaineer Steve Barry, while trekking along the slopes of Genkar Puensum, stumbled upon some biological material that may prove the existence of an ancient species of hominids previously believed to be extinct living on this mountain. Could this be one of the mythical creatures spoken of by the Bhutanese people? Like many of its cousins in the Himalayas, Genkar Puensum, which is Dzongkha for White Peak of the Three Spiritual Brothers, has a fair share of myths and mysteries surrounding its existence. For instance, there is no single record of anyone ever climbing to the peak of this mountain, and this is not for lack of trying. As a matter of fact, before the mountain was closed to climbers in 1994, about 4 different expeditions were attempted on Genkar Puensum. However, for one random reason or the other, each of these expeditions failed. There's an even more bizarre account about another attempt by a Japanese team to summit the mountain in 1998, but the climb got cancelled under highly suspicious circumstances. Now, we'll get to that a bit later. In the meantime, though, there's one aspect of that account that leads me to my next point. You might be wondering how any expedition could have been planned in 1998 when Genkar Puensum was closed to climbers 4 years earlier in 1994. Well, the team planned to climb the mountain from the Chinese side, because as it turns out, Genkar Puensum sits on the border between China and Bhutan. Or at least that's what the Chinese say. The Bhutanese, on the other hand, put Genkar Puensum firmly within Bhutan territory. Interestingly, this debate turns out to be an echo of an ancient controversy that has long surrounded this mountain. Let me explain. Genkar Puensum was first mapped and surveyed in 1922, and then in the century that followed, it was mapped and measured several other times. But here's where it gets weird. Each of these attempts produced shockingly inaccurate results. It wasn't just the height of the mountain that was off, the location was off as well. In fact, the location was so inaccurate that a climbing team that featured A-list climbers and was sponsored by Rolex had to turn back because they were unable to find the mountain. And some say they weren't the only ones. Your first thought is probably to chalk this up to the stage of technological advancement at the time, and that would have been perfectly understandable, except that Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, had already been mapped and measured for at least 65 years before the first attempt to measure Genkar Puensum was made. This proves that humans had the technology already at that point. So what was different about this particular peak? Why did multiple attempts yield inaccurate results each time? Or are the myths actually true? are there spiritual beings who call Genkar Puensum home and don't want their location discovered. As wild as the story of Genkar Puensum's mapping and surveying is, the truth remains that the mountain was eventually correctly mapped and measured, even though its location remains up for debate today. For skeptics, this is more than enough proof that the initial inaccuracies were merely a matter of skill or access to the proper tools. And you know what? Let's grant that. Let's say all the inaccurate results were the result of human error. We still have to account for the scientific proof of the existence of a certain mythical being on Genkar Puensum, which is what we're going to spend the rest of the video exploring. In October 2015, now 21 years since Genkar Puensum was closed to climbers, mountaineer Steve Barry was doing a trek along the mountain's slopes when he came across tracks in the snow. For perspective, these tracks were at an altitude of about 17,500 feet, and across from these tracks was an impassable chasm with a sharp vertical drop and a rough mountainside no less. The rough terrain and the large size of the prints immediately ruled out the possibility that this could have been done by a human being. But it also made the tracks more puzzling, because as you can see, they could only have been made by a biped. More specifically, a creature that stands upright and walks on its 2 feet. So, bear, right? Snowy region, bipedal footprint, a bear seems like the best fit. Except, here is a picture of bear tracks in the snow, and here is the picture Steve Barry took of the tracks he found at Genkar Puensum. Notice the difference? In the first photo, the bear tracks are alternating from left paw to right paw. In Barry's photo, the one with the tracks from Genkar Puensum, the tracks are in a straight file, suggesting that the creature in question walks by putting one foot directly in front of the other. So, what could this creature have been? The question puzzled Barry until he made a second trek along Genkar Puensum the following year. Oddly, on Steve Barry's second expedition, he, once again, came across a set of prints in an impassable terrain that looked exactly like the ones he saw on his first trek. This time, however, things were a bit different. With the 2015 prints, one of them made an almost 180-degree turn, which further heightened Barry's curiosity and made him wonder even more where these tracks could have come from. When Barry got back from his trek, he spoke with the locals about what he had seen, and they confirmed what he already suspected. Those prints couldn't be human, because no one had ever set foot on that particular pass where Barry found the prints, leading Barry to the hypothesis that the mystery creature on Genkar Puensum was probably an ape-like hominid. But if humans are the only upright, bipedal hominids still in existence, then what exactly was this ape-like hominid? With the local myths around Genkar Puensum, the one theory that has prevailed among believers is that this creature was very likely a yeti, a Himalayan Bigfoot. The skeptic might find this laughable, as yetis are considered mythical beings. But what if there's scientific evidence proving their existence on Genkar Puensum this time? Alright, let's get back to Steve Barry and his last expedition at Genkar Puensum. As I mentioned earlier, Barry spoke to the locals after returning from his trek, and they told him that no one had ever set foot on that path where he found the prints. Well, about 4 days after that conversation, Barry got in contact with a yak herder. Somehow, the two got talking, and Barry told the herder about his curious discovery while trekking along the sacred mountain. When the herder heard Barry's story, he knew immediately what the mountaineer had found: a miigwoi. According to Bhutanese lore, a miigwoi was about as tall as a human, with long dun brown hair and a very hairy face like that of a dog. But was this the creature that left the mysterious tracks? To confirm, the yak herder asked Barry for his photos of the tracks, and as Barry tells it, when the herder saw the photos, he did a double take, which you can probably guess meant that he believed Barry had just found the tracks of a miigwoi. Apparently, according to legends of the Migoi, the creature walks by putting one foot directly in front of the other, leaving prints behind in the snow that look exactly like the ones in Barry's photos. But while the story sounded convincing, the truth is Barry didn't exactly buy the idea that the creature living on Genkar Puensum was some mythical being with an odd walking step. Barry remained of the opinion that this was probably some unknown or undiscovered hominid dwelling in the mountains. But as he further pursued the trail of evidence, his findings started to suggest that maybe he was thinking about this too one-dimensionally, and we'll get to the investigation in just a minute. Just before we get to that though, remember that bizarre account with the Japanese climbers I mentioned earlier? Well, it's time to go over it. So, May 1998, 4 years after Genkar Puensum was officially closed to climbers, these guys from Japan got permission from the Chinese Mountaineering Association to climb the mountain from the Tibetan side. As I already mentioned, China puts Genkar Puensum on the border between China and Bhutan. So the Japanese crew were hoping to maneuver their way over Bhutan's ban by going through China, which they did successfully at first. Anyway, with the permission secured, the climbers began their ascent, only to be told halfway through that their permission had been withdrawn and they had to make their way down. The official story was that the Bhutanese people had protested, leading China to cancel the climbers' expedition. And very likely this was at least partly true. However, when Tomatsu Nakamura writes about his cancelled climb, his version of events includes a cryptic commentary that has added an air of mystery as to why Genkar Puensum is closed to climbers. Here's what he wrote. As I cannot disclose an inside story behind the sudden cancellation, I write only that the reason why the permit was withdrawn was because of a political issue with the Bhutan government. To date, no one knows the hidden reason behind the sudden cancellation of that 1998 expedition. And in the absence of any confirmed explanation, speculations exist that this might have something to do with the mythical creatures living on Genkar Puensum that might be less legendary and more real than most people think. So, could it be that the Bhutanese Migoi myths aren't just myths? And could it be that the Bhutanese government knows about it? The answer to that is a highly probable yes. So here's the thing, the Himalayas have had a history of playing host to certain mythical elements that turned out to be real. A good example is the blue poppy flower. The blue poppy is Bhutan's national flower, but for a very long time, others outside of Bhutan lumped the flower together with the yeti, believing the flower to be mythical since no one had ever seen it. Fast forward to the 20th century, and this flower was spotted by British explorer Frederick Bailey, confirming once and for all that the blue poppy was real. So, with this sort of precedent, and the fact that a large part of Bhutan remains undiscovered, it's not exactly far-fetched to assume that this might also be the case with the Migoi. The Bhutanese, for one, are insistent on the fact that the Migoi are not merely mythical beings, which is why they have a yeti preserve that's bigger than the whole country of Singapore. It's called the Bigfoot Valley in Saktang Wildlife Sanctuary. And according to this website, Bhutanese environmentalist Dasho Benji found some hair while on a royal hunt for yeti, which returned an inconclusive result when the sample was sent to a cancer institute in Washington for testing. In other words, the test could not provide any information on the hair, whether it belonged to an animal or a human, which is quite similar to what Steve Barry would experience when he tried analyzing some of the odd materials he found on Genkar Puensum. So here's something I didn't mention at first when I was talking about Barry's expedition. Mysterious footprints weren't the only things Barry claimed to have found. The mountaineer also claimed that he had a clear print of a thumb dug deep into the snow along with some fecal matter. Unfortunately, I couldn't find photos of the thumbprint. The fecal matter, on the other hand, may have been disgusting, but it turned out to be the deciding evidence in this case. So, after doing some analysis on the feces, Barry found that the specimen had a 99% match with human fecal matter. which normally one might see as a reasonable basis to conclude that the specimen was definitely human. However, there are two issues with that conclusion. First, the terrain where the fecal matter was found was too remote and tough for humans. Secondly, and most importantly, gorillas and chimps do have a 98% DNA match with humans. So, even with that high a DNA match, there's still no guarantee that the species that left this feces was human. What is certain, however, is that whatever this creature is, it's a close relative of humans. And if that's the case, then maybe Barry and the Bhutanese people are both right. Maybe it's just like the legend of the blue poppy flower. So could it be that the Miigwoi, which the Bhutanese people insist exists, is actually a species under the genus Homo that evolved differently and hasn't gone extinct just yet? Would it be so far-fetched to think that we aren't the only species left in existence among our genus? Anthropologist Gregory Forth is of the opinion that we have reason to believe that we aren't the only human species around. Take the Flores man, for example. The Flores man, or Homo floresiensis, was native to Flores Island in Indonesia and evolved differently from us, taking on a hobbit-like stature and a different skin color due to the lack of food resources on the isolated island. Now, according to science, Flores man went extinct about 50,000 years ago, which is relatively recent from an evolutionary point of view. But folktales and eyewitness accounts from the Leo people of Flores Island speak of present-day sightings of a certain hobbit-like ape man within the locality. Typically, most of these sightings have been written off as legends or myths, just like reports of the blue poppy flower. But after investigating reports of sightings and interviewing all eyewitnesses involved, Forth's conclusion was that the best way to explain what they told me is that a non-sapiens hominin has survived on Flores to the present or very recent times. It therefore leaves the possibility open that there is at least one other human species that has continued to coexist with us Homo sapiens, contrary to our initial conclusions. Perhaps there's even more than one. After all, in 2011, on a Yeti trek to the Azaskaya cave in the Kemerovo region, some hair samples were found that, according to tests, came from a human-like creature. More specifically, this creature wasn't human, but it was much closer to humans in its DNA than to monkeys. So, in light of this admittedly disputed discovery, is there a possibility that there's a human species science is yet to identify that lives on Genkar Puensum and is well known to the Bhutanese? Let's go over the evidence again. 1. Creature walks on 2 feet, but not like any currently existing biped that can endure the weather conditions in the Himalayas. 2. Creature stands upright. 3. Bhutanese describe Miigwoi as human-looking with hair all over, which would make sense if this was a human species that evolved in the Himalayas and had to adapt to the cold. 4. Fecal matter has a 99% match with humans, which is not human, but also not chimp or gorilla, who are farther away from humans genetically and couldn't live at such high altitudes anyway. 5. Bits of evidence around the world suggest that Homo sapiens might not be the only human species still in existence. So, is this about to be yet another time when the Bhutanese people are proven right? Is there a yet-to-be-discovered species dwelling upon Genkar Puensum? As promising as DNA analysis and other scientific investigations in other places in the world are, there are still many who doubt Steve Barry's discoveries, and some of them are even believers. But before we get to that, I should point out that Genkar Puensum's title as the world's highest unclimbed mountain might just be arbitrary at best. For one, consider that there isn't a definitive database detailing the climbing history of every single mountain in the world. Besides, even in cases where there are records, some might not be digitized just yet, some might not be translated into English, and some might even be illegitimate records altogether. Ultimately, the point is that there's a lot of gray area around mountaineering feats and records, especially from before the advent of portable cameras and the internet. So, is Genkar Puensum really the highest unclimbed mountain in the world? Well, the generally accepted answer is yes. But in reality, someone may have climbed the mountain and we just don't know it. That said, let's get back to Steve Barry and his findings. As I said, even some believers doubt Barry. John Downes, for instance, is a notable cryptozoologist from the famous Center for 14 Zoology, and he is skeptical of Barry's claims. As far as Downes is concerned, the steepness of the slope suggests to him that only an animal like a mountain goat would have been able to make such a Herculean climb. But it's not just Barry's claims that people doubt. Some also point out his vested interest in the discovery of mythical creatures on Genkar Puensum, and to be honest, they do have a point. Barry does sell tours of the Himalayas through his company, Mountain Kingdoms, so it's entirely possible that he's making this entire thing up to boost ticket sales. After all, it wouldn't be the first time Yeti sightings were staged. In 2021, a Russian official admitted to staging bogus Yeti sightings to attract tourists to Siberia and boost the region's economy. But even more to the point, it turns out that the fact that the tracks looked nothing like human footprints does not necessarily rule out the possibility that they were, in fact, made by humans, especially because locals of the Himalayas have been known to have abnormally shaped feet. Some Tibetans, for instance, have been known to have feet sizes that are larger than normal. In fact, in many cases, some toes may be reduplicated with a couple of digits even fused together to form a larger than normal toe. Or the big toes could get deformed and then form a right angle to the foot, like you commonly find in Nepal. Point is, foot deformities are not uncommon in the Himalayas. And what's more intriguing is the fact that locals of the Himalayas can walk bare feet in the snow for extended periods without developing frostbite. It might sound extreme, but during a scientific investigation of the Everest region called the Silver Hut Expedition, scientists observed a Nepalese pilgrim do precisely that. This pilgrim lived at 6,000 feet normally, but ascended to 15,000 feet without shoes, gloves, a sleeping bag, or any protective equipment besides a woolen coat. After remaining there for 2 weeks, the man returned to base without a single frostbite. This already brings to question the theory that the tracks Barry found on Genkar Puensum couldn't possibly be human because the altitude was too high and the tracks themselves didn't look human. But then again, the locals Barry spoke to did say that no human had ever set foot on that particular path. Plus, Barry had described the slope as dangerous, with an impassable chasm and a sharp vertical drop. So even if humans could leave such tracks in theory, practically it would still be impossible considering the terrain. This has to mean that it's the Miigwoi, right? Well, not so fast. We need to analyze the tracks first. And according to the results of the analysis carried out, it appears the creature that left the tracks was not actually a Miigwoi, and not even a primate. As John Downes had theorized, it was a 4-footed animal, precisely the Argali sheep. So, does that solve our mystery? Well, yes, but only in part, because there's still the fecal matter. Where did that waste come from? What elusive species with a 99% DNA match with humans lives up on Genkar Puensum? Why was Tamotsu Nakamura suddenly prohibited from climbing Genkar Puensum? And the fact that a large area of Bhutan, which is as big as Singapore, has not been explored till now adds more credence to the story that maybe, just maybe, there's a chance Miigwoi exist. Lastly, we come to Mount Shasta, a mountain more disturbing than the last two combined. In all my time exploring strange and mysterious topics, I've never come across a place quite like this. This mountain has it all: UFO sightings, secretive cults, whispers of lost civilizations. Mount Shasta seems to be a magnet for the unexplained. And with so many missing person reports tied to this area, you have to wonder, what on earth is really happening on this mountain? Mount Shasta is one of the most beautiful mountains in Northern California, but its beauty is not what makes this place popular. It's the air of uneasiness that surrounds it, like you're always being watched, and the several oddities that occur that make Mount Shasta a terrifying place to be. Never have I seen a place that is a treasure trove for all things strange. It has UFOs, cults, lost cultures, strange beings from other worlds, and so many terrifying missing people reports that you just have to ask, what the heck is going on at Mount Shasta? At 14,179 feet above sea level, Mount Shasta is an amazing stratovolcano, and like other volcanoes of this type, it has a more standard and almost cartoonish cone shape that is made up of 4 separate cones that overlap. This makes it a striking and easy-to-see landmark. As you get closer to Mount Shasta, the first thing you notice is how out of place it looks. Even though it's one of the biggest peaks in North America, it doesn't connect to any other mountains. Located in Northern California, Mount Shasta is so high and steep that it cuts through the clouds and makes its own weather. With its snow-covered faces, it's a great place for skiers, walkers, mountain climbers, and campers. But for a long time, it has also been a popular vacation spot for spiritually minded people who want an unusual vacation. Thousands of people climb the mountain every year in the hopes of connecting with something beyond the earth and rocks. There are even tour guides and places to visit that focus on meditation, vision quests, and other New Age activities that are said to be spiritual sites on the mountain. And you can easily find bookstores that sell spiritual books about healing, vibrations, crystals, angels, and other topics. Many of these bookstores say they are connected to the mountain itself. And before you call them crazy, there are actually documented cases that make you see that maybe they do have a point, especially if we start from the very beginning. According to local indigenous tribes, namely the Klamath people, Mount Shasta is home to the spirit chief Skell, who came down from the sky to live on top of the mountain. Skell fought another spirit called Lau, the spirit of the below world, who lived at Mount Mazama. He threw hot rocks and fire at Lau before finally defeating him. Although there are various modern conspiracies associated with Mount Shasta, it has long been a sacred site to various indigenous tribes. In such, artifacts found in the area suggest that humans had been living in the area for at least 9,000 years, which, by the way, makes it one of the longest occupied areas in the country. Some of the tribes that still live near the mountain are the Wintu, the Modoc, the Akamawi, the Atsugui, and the Shasta. The traditional stories say that the mountain is home to many spirits and guards, and most of the tribes tell the same story of the fight between Skell and Lau. Despite their little differences here and there, Native American legends all have one thing in common: you should never go above the tree line, which they all believe is where the sky people live. These are beings that are said to be more powerful than we humans, and even some historical records found kinda tallies with the legends of the tribes. Not far from Mount Shasta is Petroglyph Point, which has some of the oldest stone writing ever found in North America. The glyphs show animals, rivers, the sun, and stars, but there are also carvings of what some people think could be these sky people. Native American tribes thought that the sky people were spiritual beings who lived in a different world, a plane of existence where the souls and spirits of the dead lived, and they could come into our world. Now, this is not entirely a cause for concern. Everywhere on Earth has some mythical attachment to it, whether it is true or not. But what makes Mount Shasta different is the mysterious things that follow that make us question if it is all true, especially when it comes to how easily people disappear on Mount Shasta without ever being found. A terrifying case that comes to mind is the Yuba County Five. Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Ted Weiher all died mysteriously. On a cold February night in 1978, the men got into Jack's car and were going straight home to Yuba City and Marysville, which was about 78 kilometers away. They stopped at a supermarket to buy some snacks, after which they drove off, heading home. Unfortunately, they never got home. Police investigation later revealed that instead of going home, they got off the highway and went up a mountain road, where they just disappeared. No one knows why they did this, and it was very strange. Jack's car was later found in the Yuba forest, caught in a snowdrift just off the side of the road. The keys were missing, but there was still fuel in the car, and there was a number of folded maps inside the glove compartment. Sadly, it wasn't until the snow began to melt in June of next year that police and searchers were able to get answers. Someone on a motorcycle who was riding through a mountainside found Ted Weiher's body inside a Forest Service trailer. And here's the weird thing. Ted wasn't wearing any shoes, and he was wrapped up in several blankets. Plus, the trailer had everything it needed for food and warmth, but nothing was used. The next day, June 6th, they found Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga about 18 kilometers northeast of where the car had been left outside. Family members helped with the search, and on June 7th, Jack Hewitt's body was found by his own father. Gary Mathias is the only one in the group who was never found. The news shocked the little town, and even now, no one can make sense of what exactly happened. Another mysterious disappearance is that of 69-year-old Carl Landers, who was an experienced climber who just suddenly vanished on the mountain in May of 1999. Sounds normal until you hear that he disappeared when he was in the company of two friends. It was like one moment he was there, and the next he wasn't. He vanished without a trace. Even though a thorough search that involved helicopters, searches on the ground, and thermal imaging was carried out, Carl has never been found. Not even his clothing or the equipment he was using was ever found. Prior to his disappearance, Carl had climbed almost all the mountains in California. That was his goal, and Mount Shasta was going to be the last one. But that never happened. These are just some of the cases we know about. There are hundreds of missing people cases that can't be explained. Neither have they been found. But in 2011, we got a glimpse of what could be causing this mysterious disappearance. We finally had a testimony from a survivor of a mysterious abduction, and it all came from a child, and what he revealed was straight out of a horror movie. There was a very strange case where a 3-year-old little boy named Samuel was camping with his family near Mount Shasta in 2011. The family was out hiking with Samuel behind them, only for the parents to turn around, unable to see or find him. He had disappeared with no trace at all. He was there one moment and gone the next, just like with Carl Landers. They didn't even have a shoe print to track the boy. They started searching for Samuel, also involving the relevant authorities, but with each hour passing, it was looking bleak. Fortunately, after 5 hours, Samuel was found, but where he was found raised more questions than answers. He was found miles away from where he had initially gone missing, which didn't make sense because there was no way a young boy like that could travel that far in the space of 30 minutes max. When questioned about how he walked that far, he said he didn't know. He couldn't explain how he had gone so far away from his family. Now this is where things got strange. On being found, Samuel made a very strange claim. He said a woman who looked just like his grandmother took him into a cave. Only it wasn't his grandmother. Not only that, he said there were people in the cave, and they all had eerie glowing eyes, while some of them were just frozen. This new grandmother seemed nice at first, but she was checking him, like she was noting the differences here and there. Then she asked the little boy to poop on a piece of stick, which the boy refused. And then, after she was done, the next thing the boy saw was that he was back in the woods. In such, all this time, the boy actually thought he was with his grandma, It was only when he told his story to his grandma weeks later over a phone call that the family became worried. At first, they thought he had a very rich and active imagination, but even the grandmother had to admit that it was weird for kids to imagine pooping on a piece of stick. Kids don't really imagine that. At worst, they just do it, no imagination needed. And even if we agree to disagree that it was the kid's imagination, that doesn't still answer how the kid was found miles away from his family. And this is just one of several reports of people's weird experience on Mount Shasta. There have been reports of strange lights in the sky that move around randomly, change colors, and don't act like any known aircraft. Some visitors to Mount Shasta have even said that they had had spiritual encounters with beings they call extraterrestrial or interdimensional, in which they had visions and telepathic communication. There are also numerous Reddit posts where people share their encounters. Now, I can't verify their claims, but one thing that caught my attention with these reports is the Me Too movement that followed. It turns out that multiple people have witnessed these strange events, and some can even tell you exactly where all these happened. But the more I research about this mountain to find out more about it, the more I begin to see this has been a common occurrence to everyone living nearby, even as far back as pre-flood civilizations. Mount Shasta has also been a focus for non-Native American legends for a long time. One such legend is that it is the location or entrance to the hidden city of Telos. Telos is a city that is said to exist inside Mount Shasta, inhabited by superior and advanced beings from the lost kingdom of Lemuria. Yeah, that Lemuria that existed during the times of Atlantis. Frederick Spencer Oliver wrote a book called Dweller on Two Planets in 1899. He told a story based on what was found written on ancient Hindu tablets. The story says that over 1 million years ago, the Earth was ruled by two very advanced civilizations, the Atlanteans and the Lemurians. Both had technology that was much more advanced than any race or civilization at that time, but Atlantis was the most powerful. It was good and peaceful for a long time, and everyone respected each other. But around 250,000 years ago, Atlantis became corrupted and wanted to rule everyone on Earth. The Lemurians found out about this. They didn't want to be ruled by Atlantis, and wanted to be left alone. This refusal began the Atlantean-Lemurian War. For years, the two nations used destructive nuclear weapons against each other. The resulting explosions were so powerful and violent that they shifted the Earth's magnetic poles and made the tectonic plates move. This resulted in a huge flood that hit the world and wiped out not just both civilizations fighting, but every other civilization that existed. By now you are thinking, Younger Dryas. The few Atlanteans who survived fled to Agartha, an underground city that I'll be talking about on this channel, while the remaining Lemurians fled to Mount Shasta and built the city called Telos. These Lemurians lived in a complicated network of caves inside the mountain, with walls covered in jewels and floors covered in fur. They were sometimes seen walking on the ground wearing white robes. The Lemurians were said to be 7 feet tall, thin, beautiful, and have glowing skin. Their long necks were decorated with collars made of gold, jewels, and beads. Lemurians usually dress in white robes and shoes, but sometimes they're seen in tunics or nothing at all. Not only was their city impressive, but the Lemurians had powers that could easily control magnetism, electricity, and even the ability to alter space and time. They have airships for transportation and also an artificial sun right inside the caves that they created with their magical power. Now, I know it all sounds like a good story, but I'm going to stop you there because someone actually found the city, and that person also found the remains of these beings. In 1904, a British prospector named J.C. Brown actually found a lost hidden city under Mount Shasta. Brown was initially hired by the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England to look for gold. During his search, he found a cave that sloped downwards for up to 11 miles. He entered into this cave, and inside it, he saw a town buried below it. When Brown reached the end of the tunnel, he saw what looked like the remains of an ancient city. He saw long abandoned equipment that looked like it had been used in a mining operation, as well as statues, tablets, shields, and weapons all made of gold, and all were written with hieroglyphics. He also found what he called a worship room, with figures that seemed to glow in the dark. The last room in the cave system was a tomb with 27 huge skeletons arranged in a row, with an average height of 7 feet. The tallest ones were over 10 feet tall. Brown was perplexed. He didn't know what to do with what he just saw. The next thing Brown did was close the cave's entrance and not tell anyone about it. What J.C. Brown saw was almost identical to what the Lemurians are believed to have looked like. After 30 years, Brown told John C. Root his story. I don't know why he had to wait 30 years to say something, but he did. Root then put together an exploration team in Stockton, California. The team had about 80 members, filled with researchers, scientists, and explorers. This was big in every way. Lemuria's existence was about to be proven, plus the gold that would be found would make them very rich. Newspapers widely covered the story and the excitement around the adventure, everyone eager to discover Lemuria. But on the day the team was set to explore the cave, Brown did not show up. In such, Brown was never seen or heard from again. After Brown disappeared, some people said he was a fraud and that's why he ran away, seeing as he was about to be caught up in his lies. But here's the thing. J.C. Brown never took any money from anyone for the expedition. The only thing he did was just tell his experience. That's all. So how was he a fraud if he never took anybody's money in the first place? This is why the other side of the argument believes he might have been erased by a powerful group. Lastly, there is one more theory left that at first sounds super crazy, but on closer inspection could be a plausible reason for Brown's disappearance. Some believe that J.C. Brown didn't need a search party to find Lemuria because he had already been there and been granted access, and was probably beamed up by a mysterious machine that took him to the city of Talos. Now, this theory sounds ridiculous at first, until the description of the supposed mysterious machine that took J.C. Brown. The machine or vehicle was described as an oval or round shape that could move at ease. And by now, you're already thinking of a UFO, and I'm here to tell you that you might be right. There have been reports of UFOs around Mount Shasta for more than 100 years, increasing every year. People have seen chrome objects hanging around dark mountain roads. Others report seeing lights moving in a line and disappearing after circling the peak. A couple said they saw a UFO hovering over the St. Germain Foundation land in 1991. This happened about 45 minutes from Mount Shasta. As late as 2008, there was another report. Heck, in February 2020, something was seen in the sky above the mountain. The pictures went viral, but the UFO turned out to be a curved cloud in the end. Even so, the belief was so strong that it was a UFO that the U.S. Forest Service had to release a report to let everyone know it wasn't an alien. However, what makes Mount Shasta strange is that the UFOs don't just float around the mountain. People have seen them fly into it, like there is an entrance somewhere on the mountain, like it's going home after a long journey. Every single witness that has seen a UFO in Mount Shasta always, and I mean always, talks about seeing the ship fly into the side of the mountain, or fly into it from above and just disappear. Mount Shasta is also widely regarded as a paranormal hotspot where the barriers between worlds are substantially thinner, and as a result, beings from other worlds enter ours. People have seen strange beings in Mount Shasta's caves for decades. These beings seem to be able to walk through walls and then disappear. In such, the famous Count of St. Germain was seen on Mount Shasta. Guy Ballard was hiking on Mount Shasta when he saw a man who presented himself as the Count of St. Germain. The man possessed superior knowledge that convinced Ballard he wasn't just speaking to a mere man. If you know about the Count of Saint Germain, you'd know how mysterious and superior his intellect can be. In such, I'm making a video about him which will be uploaded in the next couple of months. Ballard believed he was talking to a superior being. That experience that day helped him form a religion of his own called the I Am activity in the 1930s, and at one time it had 1 million followers. Not the social media type, but actual people who believed in what he was teaching. This is just one of many experiences from millions of people who have visited Mount Shasta, and everyone has a different experience that makes it hard to pinpoint what Mount Shasta is really about. So what exactly is going on at Mount Shasta? Is it aliens, gods, ancient beings, or even something we don't know? So what the heck is it? The answer is, no one really knows. For starters, it's hard to figure out ancient native legends because we don't have any proof to support or disprove them. These stories have been passed down for thousands of years, so it's not only possible but also likely that they've changed over time. While Mount Shasta isn't very active right now, it has erupted many times in the past, and people lived nearby during those eruptions. When native tribes said that Mount Shasta was home to a god who threw flaming rocks at his enemies, it could just be they were trying to make sense of what they saw with the volcanoes. I mean, take this story for example, the Amazon's boiling river. For centuries upon centuries, the natives thought it was an act of God. Peruvian-American geoscientist Andres Russo first heard of the story from his grandfather, who told him about an Amazon river so boiling hot that it scared the Spaniards during their Incan conquest. So Russo thought it was just a story, until he found out that his aunt and uncle had been to that same river, which meant it was real. Russo went exploring in 2011, even though his friends told him that a hot river couldn't exist without a nearby volcano, and there was no volcano around. Led by his aunt and a shaman's apprentice, Russo arrived at a tributary 80 feet wide, 4 miles long, and over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. A true, unreported, boiling river. But here's the thing, despite it being 2011 with all the technology and all that, people still believed this river was spiritual. Local shamans called it Shene Timpishka and believed it was created by a giant snake spirit called Yukamama. But in reality, Shene Timpishka is heated by a geothermal gradient, which Russo described thusly. Think of the boiling river as an earth artery where you have that hot water running up, a fault, and heating up what starts off as a small, just ambient temperature cold stream right in the middle of the jungle. And as it runs over all these big fault zones, it supercharges it to turn it into ultimately almost 4 miles of thermal flow, much of that hot enough to kill you. So this was a perfect example of how easy it was for the locals to make something supernatural to give a rational explanation to something they couldn't explain. And we humans do this every time. Our brain, whether you know it or not, always tries to make sense of things we don't understand. That's why those who don't believe in God believe in the universe, or karma, or the laws of the universe, trying to make sense of it all. Also, during my research, a lot more people visited Mount Shasta than I thought, and it was not for spiritual enlightenment, but to just hike and climb the mountain. Mount Shasta is actually a great mountain to climb or hike. In such, I found a Reddit post where people were asking for tips on the best way to climb the mountain, and users were pouring in commenting on their positive and enjoyable experiences, and nothing strange happened to them. Sure, some people died while hiking, but there was usually an explanation, like there was a mistake during the climb or hike, and their bodies are usually found. Heck, there were comments from people who said they lived near Mount Shasta most of their lives, and they never felt anything strange from the mountain. In such, the Reddit post about the strange occurrences was the first time they heard about ghosts, creatures, and UFOs. And for the UFO reports, the weather at Mount Shasta is kind of perfect for creating lenticular cloud formations. Lenticular clouds are stationary clouds that form mostly in the troposphere, typically in parallel alignment to the wind direction. These clouds are shaped like huge UFOs, and if you didn't know about them, you would think they were UFOs, just like the natives of Peru thought the boiling stream was from a giant snake spirit, when in reality what you call UFOs are actually just clouds. So now that we've debunked some theories, what does that tell us? Nothing. I see Mount Shasta as two sides of a coin. On one side, nothing crazy or supernatural happens, and a lot of people can testify to it, even people who have lived there for years. On the other side of this coin, strange, unexplainable things happened. Like the boy who went missing only to be found miles away in a short period of time, or like the experienced climber Carl Landers, that not even his shoe was ever found despite going missing in a sort of open space. This is one peculiar story where everyone is right, even the UFO theory, because as we've seen, even the United States government has publicly admitted to the existence of UFOs. So what's to say one isn't hovering over Mount Shasta? Even the theory of an ancient civilization, as far-fetched as it sounds, could be right. Places like Bimini Road in the Bahamas make us wonder if these civilizations exist. And even till tomorrow, archaeologists are still finding things that people once thought were stories, but now are proven true. I mean, how does it sound if I told you that there is an underground area so vast it contains a life-size terracotta army of Emperor Qi Shi Huang, or how the Dead Sea Scrolls proved major things recorded in the Bible? You'd probably call me crazy, but all these things happened. And finding these things meant that people who talked about these things were not really crazy. And if those people were right, what's to say all the theories we've said so far about Mount Shasta isn't?